The old house at the corner of Maple Lane stood quietly beneath the early morning sky, its white paint faded, its porch swing creaking softly in the wind. Inside lived Margaret Lane, a 76-year-old widow with silver hair tied neatly in a bun and eyes that once sparkled with laughter, now dulled by years of silence. Her days had a rhythm: tea at 7 a.m., letters to no one at noon, and an old radio humming softly through the afternoon. Every morning, she fed the stray cat that waited on her porch, the only creature that visited her regularly. The neighbors were kind but distant. They waved when passing by, but few stopped to talk. Most of her friends had either moved away or passed on, and her son, who lived 3 states over, hadn't visited in almost 4 years. He's busy, she often told herself, forcing a small smile. As her 78th birthday approached, Margaret didn't expect anything. No cards, no calls, no surprises. She'd even stopped baking her own cake. What's the point? She whispered to the cat one evening as she watched the sunset fade through the window. But that same night, as the clock ticked past midnight, a small envelope slid through her mailbox. No return address. Just one word written in neat handwriting: tomorrow. She stared at it for a long time, her heart fluttering like it hadn't in years. Who could it be? A prank, a mistake, or something else? For the first time in a long while, she went to bed curious, not lonely. And outside, under the streetlight, a stranger in a gray coat watched her window, quietly, patiently, as if waiting for the right moment to step into her life. The next morning, sunlight filtered gently through the lace curtains, scattering golden patterns across the wooden floor. Margaret stirred from her sleep to the faint sound of rustling, not from inside, but from outside her front porch. Her cat meowed softly, sitting by the window, staring at something beyond the glass. Wrapping her old knitted shawl around her shoulders, Margaret shuffled to the front door. When she opened it, the morning breeze greeted her face, cool, crisp, alive. And there, sitting neatly on the porch steps, was a small brown box tied with a red ribbon. No name, no card, just a simple white tag that read, "Happy birthday, Margaret." She froze, her breath caught in her throat. How? She whispered. Nobody had remembered her birthday in years. Her trembling fingers reached for the box, the ribbon soft between her aged hands. She carried it inside like something sacred, placing it on the small kitchen table beside her teacup. For a moment, she just looked at it, afraid to open it, afraid that the moment might vanish if she moved too quickly. Then, slowly, she untied the ribbon and lifted the lid. Inside was a beautiful porcelain teacup, painted with tiny blue forget-me-not flowers, her favorite. She gasped. Years ago, she'd owned a set just like it, before the house fire took so many of her things. At the bottom of the box was a folded note, written in careful handwriting. "Some things are meant to find their way back to you. Enjoy your tea today." Tears welled in her eyes as she ran her fingers over the delicate cup. It wasn't just a gift, it was memory, comfort, and warmth she hadn't felt in years. "Who are you?" she whispered aloud, glancing toward the window. All day, she couldn't stop smiling. She brewed tea in the new cup and sat on her porch swing, sipping slowly, watching the street for anyone who might glance her way. A mailman passed, a neighbor walked her dog, but none of them stopped. Still, for the first time in years, Margaret felt seen. That evening, she placed the empty box by her door, in case someone came back. She wrote a small note of her own and slipped it inside. "Thank you, whoever you are. You made an old woman's day brighter." Then she went to bed, her heart light, and yet curiosity flickered like candlelight inside her chest. Who would do this? Someone from town? Someone from her past? Just before dawn, a soft knock echoed on the porch again. Her cat stirred and meowed. Margaret hurried to the window, but she was too late. The street was empty, except for a fresh morning mist curling through the air. And where the box had been, another note lay pinned beneath a small stone. It read simply, "Tomorrow, look under the old oak tree." Margaret pressed the note to her chest, her hands trembling. For the first time in a long, long time, she felt something more powerful than loneliness: hope. Outside, in the shadow of the trees, the stranger in the gray coat smiled quietly, watching her silhouette in the window. He whispered to himself, "Happy birthday, Mrs. Lane. You deserve a little magic again." The next morning arrived wrapped in golden light. The air smelled of wet earth and blooming lilacs. Margaret stood by her window, clutching the note that had kept her awake all night. "Tomorrow, look under the old oak tree." She hadn't walked that far in months. Her knees ached, Her steps had grown slow, and the idea of going beyond her porch felt like an adventure she wasn't sure she could take. But something inside her, something young and curious, whispered, "Go." She slipped on her worn coat, tucked the note in her pocket, and called softly to her cat, "Wish me luck, dear." The little creature meowed as if in reply. The oak tree stood at the far end of Maple Lane, its roots twisting deep into the earth like the veins of time. Children used to play there years ago, her son included, back when the world felt fuller and louder. As she approached, she noticed something unusual near the base of the trunk, a small wooden box half hidden beneath a pile of leaves. Her breath caught. She knelt slowly, brushing the leaves aside, her heart thudding like a drum. The box was painted white, though the paint had chipped away with age. She opened it carefully, and inside was a small stack of old photographs, each one perfectly preserved. The first photo made her gasp. It was of her old home, the one that had burned years ago. Her husband stood beside her in the garden, smiling proudly. On the back, written in the same neat handwriting as the notes, were the words, "You built a beautiful life even when you didn't think so." Tears filled her eyes. She turned over the next photo, her son, as a little boy, sitting under this very same oak tree holding a red kite. And beneath that picture, another note, "Memories don't fade. They wait for us to remember." Margaret pressed the photo to her chest, her voice breaking. "Who are you?" she whispered again, her eyes scanning the quiet street. But no one was there, only the wind, softly moving through the branches above. Then, as she placed the photos back into the box, she noticed something else inside, a small brass key tied with a string. A tiny tag hung from it that said simply, "Tomorrow, the attic." A pulse quickened. The attic? She hadn't been up there in years, not since her husband's passing. It was dusty, full of boxes and memories she'd locked away long ago. Clutching the box to her chest, she made her slow way home, every step heavy with questions, but light with something new, anticipation. That night, she sat by her window, staring at the moon, the brass key resting in her palm. The air was quiet except for the sound of her clock ticking softly on the mantel. "Whoever you are," she whispered to the darkness, "you've brought life back into this old house, and into me." Outside, down the street, the stranger in the gray coat leaned against a lamppost, smiling faintly as he saw the faint glow of her lamp. He pulled out his notebook and wrote one line before walking away into the mist. "Step by step, we bring her home again." The next morning, sunlight streamed through the lace curtains like ribbons of gold. Margaret sat at her kitchen table, staring at the small brass key lying beside her cup of tea. "The attic," she murmured. Her heart beat faster than it had in years. She hadn't climbed those stairs since the day her husband passed away. Back then, it had hurt too much. Every corner filled with echoes of laughter, of shared dreams, of a life that felt like someone else's now. But the stranger's clues had awakened something in her, a courage she didn't know she still possessed. She took a deep breath, grabbed the key, and began her slow ascent. The wooden stairs creaked softly beneath her feet, the sound echoing like a heartbeat in the stillness of the house. At the top, she hesitated. The attic door was old and stiff, its brass lock dull with age. Her hands trembled as she slid the key into the lock. Click. It turned easily, as if it had been waiting for her all this time. The smell of cedar and dust filled the air as she pushed the door open. Light filtered through the small circular window, illuminating forgotten boxes, old furniture draped in sheets, and faint traces of life, long gone. She stood there for a moment, breathing it all in. Memories fluttered like ghosts around her. Margaret pulled the cloth from an old trunk and knelt beside it. Inside were relics of another time, her wedding veil, her husband's toolbox, her son's baseball glove. She smiled through tears, touching each item like it was alive. But then she noticed a small envelope resting on top of a stack of yellowed letters. Her heart stopped. It was addressed to her, in her husband's handwriting. Her trembling fingers tore it open. The paper was fragile, the ink faded, but the words were clear. "My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, it means time has passed, more than I wish. But I want you to remember something. You were my greatest joy, not the house, not the garden. You. Promise me you'll never let the world grow small around you. Keep walking, keep talking, keep loving. Even when I'm gone, you are not alone. You never were." Tears rolled freely down her cheeks. She pressed the letter to her heart and whispered, "Oh, Henry, you knew." As she sat there, the sunlight shifted, and for a brief, miraculous second, she could almost hear his laugh again, smell his old aftershave, feel his presence in the air. She smiled, her grief finally softening into peace. And then she saw something else. A second note taped beneath the window frame, written in the same careful handwriting as the stranger's other messages. "Tomorrow, the park bench." She blinked, her tears drying on her cheeks. The park bench, their bench, the one where she and Henry used to sit every Sunday morning with their coffee. Margaret looked around the attic one last time. She whispered, "Thank you, whoever you are," because deep inside,
She knew this wasn't just a mystery, it was a gift. Someone out there was helping her remember how to live again. Outside, in the fading afternoon light, the stranger in the gray coat stood across the street, watching the window of the attic glow softly. He smiled faintly and whispered to himself, "Tomorrow she'll understand a little more." Then he walked away, the notebook tucked under his arm, a small red ribbon marking the next page.
The next morning, a soft drizzle painted the town in shades of silver and gray. Margaret stood by her window, watching the raindrops slide down the glass like tiny rivers of time. She held the note in her hand. "Tomorrow, the park bench." She hesitated for a moment, looking down at her worn shoes. "Henry," she whispered softly, "I hope you don't mind if I visit our place again." Then she wrapped her shawl tight, grabbed her umbrella, and stepped into the rain. The world outside smelled of wet leaves and earth, of life still breathing. Each step felt like walking through her own memories. The bakery where she and Henry used to buy cinnamon rolls, the corner bookstore that still had the same squeaky sign. By the time she reached the park, her heart was pounding. The old oak trees arched overhead like gentle guardians, and there, under the biggest one, stood their bench, weathered but still sturdy. The paint had faded, but she could still see their initials carved faintly into the wood. H+M. She smiled, her eyes misty. But then she noticed something. A small paper bag sat on the bench, tied with the same red ribbon as before. Inside was a thermos of hot tea and 2 porcelain cups painted with blue forget-me-nots, matching the one she'd received earlier. Her hand trembled as she poured the tea. Steam rose into the chilly air, curling like whispers. Then she noticed a folded letter tucked beneath the thermos. The handwriting, that same gentle, familiar style. "Some places never forget the people who loved them. I thought you might like a cup of tea where it all began. Sit here for a while and look to your right." Confused, she turned her head, and her breath caught. A man in a gray coat sat on the next bench, holding an umbrella. His face was calm, his smile kind, and there was something quietly familiar in his eyes. When he saw her looking, he nodded softly. Margaret hesitated, then smiled back, a shy, grateful smile. The man stood, walked over slowly, and said, "Good morning, Mrs. Lane. I hope I'm not intruding." Her heart skipped. Mrs. Lane. Nobody had called her that in years. "Do I know you?" she asked softly. He smiled. "Not yet, but I think you knew my father, Thomas Lane." Her umbrella nearly slipped from her hand. "Thomas? Little Thomas from next door?" she whispered, astonished. He nodded. "Yes, ma'am. He used to talk about you and Mr. Henry all the time. He said you were the kindest neighbors he ever had." Margaret's eyes filled with tears as memories flooded back. The little boy who used to mow her lawn for cookies, who'd help Henry fix his bicycle. "Oh, Thomas," she murmured. "How is he?" The man's expression softened. "He passed away last year, but before he did, he asked me to find you. Said he never forgot how you cared for him after his mother died. He wanted to return that kindness someday." Margaret covered her mouth, the tears mixing with the rain. "All these gifts, the notes, that was you?" He shook his head gently. "My father started it. I just continued what he couldn't finish." He smiled faintly. He said, "Make sure Mrs. Lane never feels forgotten." She couldn't speak. Her heart felt full of love, of loss, of connection that had somehow come full circle. The two of them sat together on the bench, sipping tea as the rain turned into soft sunlight. For the first time in years, Margaret felt truly seen and no longer alone. The man looked at her and said, "You know, he used to say you taught him what kindness looked like. I guess it's just coming back around." Margaret smiled, her voice trembling. "Then tell him he did a wonderful job." The camera fades slowly, the 2 cups resting on the bench between them, steam rising like memories, while the park glows golden in the afternoon light. The rain had stopped. The park shimmered with sunlight breaking through the clouds, scattering silver drops across the grass. Margaret and the man in the gray coat, whose name she now knew as Daniel Lane, Thomas's son, sat quietly, sipping what was left of their tea. The air was peaceful, but Daniel's expression had shifted, gentle but thoughtful. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small weathered envelope, sealed carefully and tied with a piece of twine. He held it for a long second before handing it to her. "My father wanted you to have this," he said softly. "He made me promise I'd deliver it in person." Margaret's fingers trembled as she took it. Her name was written on the front, Mrs. Margaret Lane, in handwriting she remembered so well. She looked up at Daniel, her voice shaking. "When did he write this?" Daniel smiled sadly. "A week before he passed. He said he didn't want to leave this world with unfinished kindness." Margaret hesitated, her heart thudding, and then opened the letter. The paper was slightly torn, but the words were full of warmth and love that time hadn't dimmed. "Dear Mrs. Lane, I don't know if you'll remember me the way I remember you, but you were the reason I believed in goodness after my mother died. When everyone else disappeared, you and Mr. Henry stayed. You fed me, listened to me, treated me like family. family when I had none. You once told me, kindness never dies, it just finds new hands. I didn't understand it then, but I do now. This past year, I found myself thinking about you, wondering if you were still in that house on Maple Lane. I wanted to reach out, to thank you, but life caught up. So I asked my son Daniel to help me make sure you were never forgotten. The same way you once made a lost boy feel remembered. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. But I want you to know, you changed a life, Mrs. Lane. You turned pain into something good, and now it's your turn to feel that kindness come home. Tears rolled down Margaret's cheeks as she pressed the letter to her heart. Her voice trembled. He remembered. All this time, Daniel nodded, his eyes soft. He said you saved him. He said without you and your husband, he wouldn't have made it through those years. Margaret's lips quivered into a smile. We just did what anyone should do for a child who needed love, she whispered. Daniel leaned forward, his voice low. And because you did, he spent his whole life helping others, foster kids, single mothers, veterans. He used to say, I'm just passing on what Mrs. Lane taught me. The words hit her like sunlight after a storm. For the first time, she felt the quiet truth. Even the smallest act of love can ripple through time, touching hearts you may never see again. They sat together for a long while, watching the sun set over the park, orange and pink light bathing the world in peace. Margaret smiled through her tears. I always thought I'd been forgotten, she said. Daniel shook his head. You were never forgotten, Mrs. Lane. You will remember deeply. She reached over and squeezed his hand, her voice barely a whisper. Thank you for bringing me home. As the screen fades, the camera pans to the bench, the two teacups side by side, the letter resting gently between them, a symbol of kindness reborn. And as Daniel walks her home that evening, their silhouettes blend into the soft twilight. Two souls, connected by a kindness that time could never erase. The next morning, sunlight streamed softly through Margaret's curtains. The air felt lighter, as if the weight she had carried for years had quietly drifted away during the night. On the table beside her sat the letter from Thomas, folded neatly, next to the two porcelain teacups painted with blue forget-me-nots. Margaret touched them gently, smiling through her tears. You were right, Thomas. Kindness never dies. She spent the morning thinking about Henry, about Thomas, and about Daniel's words. Kindness isn't something we own, it's something we pass on. Later that day, Margaret put on her favorite lilac shawl, the one Henry used to say made her look like springtime. She stepped outside with a purpose she hadn't felt in years. The little town looked brighter, or maybe it was just her heart that had changed. As she walked down Main Street, she noticed an elderly man sitting outside a cafe, counting coins with trembling hands. The waitress stood nearby, gently shaking her head. He didn't have enough for a meal. Margaret paused. Something inside her stirred. She walked over quietly, smiled and said, Excuse me, sir, would you mind if I joined you for lunch? I could use a little company. The man looked up, surprised, then nodded slowly. I'd like that, he said softly. She ordered 2 bowls of soup and hot tea for both of them. As they ate, she learned his name, Walter. He'd lost his wife a few years ago and his children lived far away. Loneliness had become his daily companion. Margaret listened with patience, laughter, and warmth, and when they finished their meal, she slipped a small envelope across the table, tied with a red ribbon. Walter frowned. What's this? She smiled gently. Just a reminder that you're not forgotten. When he opened it later, he found a handwritten note that said, Sometimes life brings you kindness when you least expect it. Pass it forward. The world needs more of it. Walter held the note to his chest, tears filling his eyes, and for the first time in a long while, he smiled. As Margaret walked home, the golden sunset painted the sky in soft amber and rose. She stopped at the park, resting on the same bench where it had all begun. The 2 teacups still sat beside her in a small basket, one for her and one for Henry. She poured the tea, closed her eyes and whispered, We did it, Henry. The kindness you started, it's still alive. The camera pans upward, the park glowing in evening light, the letter from Thomas fluttering gently beside her, and a new note in Margaret's handwriting resting next to it. To whoever finds this, if life ever feels lonely, remember, love has a way of finding its way back. The scene fades with the distant sound of laughter and children playing, a world moving on, warmed quietly by one woman's simple choice to keep kindness alive. Days later, the park bench once again became a silent witness to something beautiful. A young woman, lost in thought, found the envelope that Margaret had left behind. She opened it, read the words, If life ever feels lonely, remember, love has a way of finding its way back. She smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. That small note, simple, honest, human, felt like it was written just for her. She looked around the park, feeling warmth spread through her chest, as if a stranger's invisible kindness had just held her hand. From that day, she began writing her own small letters of hope, leaving them in cafes, libraries, and bus stops. And just like that, Margaret's message began to ripple across hearts she would never meet, touching lives she'd never know. Because that's how kindness works. It doesn't end. It travels from one lonely soul to another, from one act to 1,000 unseen miracles. What we learn: kindness never fades, it multiplies. The smallest gesture can become someone's biggest hope. Love doesn't die, it just finds new ways to live, and sometimes the people we help end up saving us in return.